temperatures back home. Let's go to Brussels now, and we can join for the latest from there my colleague Ben Brown. Ben.
Yes, hello from the summit here in Brussels, which is now officially over. We've been getting news conferences from the leaders, including Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, who said it is possible to get further clarification and more assurances about the Brexit deal with the European Union, and in particular on the so-called Irish backstop. That's the mechanism to prevent the return of a hard border on the island of Ireland. Now, she said that it was in the overwhelming interests of both the United Kingdom and the European Union to get her deal over the line in the House of Commons, to get the British Parliament to approve it. Mrs May also said that she had had what she called a robust discussion with the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, and said that she had told EU leaders that MPs need more certainty on the backstop issue.
I was crystal clear about the assurances which are needed on the backstop, having heard the views of MPs in the House of Commons. I reiterated that it is in the interests of the EU, as well as the UK, to get this over the line. A disorderly Brexit would be good for no one. At 27 level, the EU have published a series of conclusions. The EU made clear that it is their firm determination to work speedily on a future relationship or alternative arrangements which ensure no hard border by the 31st of December 2020, so that the backstop will not need to be triggered. If the backstop was ever triggered, it would apply only temporarily, and the EU would use its best endeavours to negotiate and conclude expeditiously a subsequent agreement that would replace the backstop. That the EU stands ready to embark on preparations so that negotiations on the future partnership can start as soon as possible.
So that was Theresa May speaking a bit earlier on. We've also just had a news conference from Jean-Claude Juncker, the Commission President, and Donald Tusk, the European Council President as well. Now, interesting that there was what has been perceived here as a bit of a spat between Mr Juncker and Theresa May, where it all started really with his news conference last night, very late last night, where he talked about the British approach, or seemed to talk about the British approach as being nebulous and imprecise, and Theresa May being vague in what she wanted from the EU. Now, she was clearly irritated by that this morning when she saw Mr Juncker here at the summit, on day 2 of the summit. Well, we couldn't hear exactly what she was saying, but lip readers were pretty clear that what she was saying is, "Did you call me nebulous?" She was irritated about that. He, at his news conference, explained that he was talking more about the level of debate back in the United Kingdom. He'd been listening, he said, to the debate in the House of Commons on Brexit. He didn't like the tone of that debate, and he was saying that that was nebulous. He then went on to be very complimentary indeed about the British Prime Minister. So too did Donald Tusk. They both had very warm words about her, describing her as a good friend who was doing her best for her country.
I think at the very first, prima facie, as the Spanish could say if they were fluent in Latin, she thought that I did criticize her by saying yesterday night that the British position was nebulous. I didn't, by the way, know that this word does exist in English, parce que nébuleux. I didn't know that this is translated in nebulous, but I did not refer to her, but to the overall state of the debate in Britain. As I told you earlier, I was following the debate in the House, and I can't see where the British Parliament is heading at. And that's why I was saying that this was nebulous, foggy in English, so it was not, I was not addressing her. And in the course of the morning, after having checked.
That was Jean-Claude Juncker there, talking about why he used the word nebulous. It's been called Nebulous Gate here. Also, by the way, we heard from Donald Tusk, because Theresa May was saying that she's looking for further talks on getting more assurances on the backstop. Donald Tusk was asked, oh, look, are there going to be more talks in the coming days? He said at the moment he's got no mandate to organise further negotiations, but I am always at Prime Minister May's disposal, whatever that might mean. So let's talk to Adam Fleming, our Brussels reporter, who's been listening to that news conference. Well, first of all, there's been a bit of, not bad blood, but a slightly fractious atmosphere, which all started with that news conference from from Jean-Claude Juncker last night, and sort of spilled over this morning, and now they're trying to make out that they're all good friends.
Well, I have to say, I've just been watching that big screen there where you can see the leaders coming and going, and Jean-Claude Juncker has just left the building, and he's feeling a lot of love today. He shook every single person's hand. He was kissing the policeman. I don't know if it's because it's the last summit before Christmas and he's kind of wishing everyone their best wishes, but he's obviously in a very good mood. Yeah, so last night at midnight at that press conference with Tusk and Juncker, President Juncker said the UK position was nebulous, taken as quite an insult. Certainly is taken as an insult by Theresa May. She arrived at the summit here today, a face like thunder, and then there was that now infamous footage from inside the room, the so-called tour de table, where the cameras capture all the leaders mingling at the start of the summit, where you can see she is very clearly angry with him. You look at what she says, you can see her lips forming the word nebulous, and then it looks like she's saying, "You called me nebulous." She's leaning in, she's having a real go at him. Then at her press conference she said, oh, I spoke to him a couple of times today. He clarified it. He was talking about the state of the political debate about the EU in Britain, a phrase he repeated in his own press conference. He said it's just that the situation was a bit foggy in the UK, although there is still a little bit of a diss there hidden in there at Theresa May, because the situation isn't foggy because people haven't been able to unite around her vision for a Brexit deal. So in a way he was still giving her a bit of a diss, and he ended up by saying, we're such good friends, we were kissing by the end of it. An image I don't really want to think about.
Not often we get a front row on a sort of diplomatic spat like that, but anyway, let's move on to the conclusions of this summit. Now, we shouldn't paint it as a disaster for Theresa May. I mean, she came here saying, you know, she didn't expect an immediate breakthrough. Let's talk about the positives first, about what she may have got out of this that she'll be pleased with.
She got this written statement, the summit conclusions, signed by the 27 leaders that say the Northern Irish backstop, so controversial at Westminster, is an insurance policy. If it comes in, it will be temporary, and the EU will continue to use their best endeavours to negotiate a future trade deal with the UK, even if the backstop has been triggered. This is where it gets complicated. The UK officials are really happy with that, because that legal phrase, best endeavours, commits the EU to certain types of behaviour. If the UK feels the EU is not working fast enough towards a trade deal, they could take it to the independent arbitration panel that is set up in the withdrawal agreement. To them, that is a legally binding and politically binding commitment from the EU to do what they can to avoid the backstop coming in. The problem is, it just took me about 40 seconds to explain it to you, so it's not exactly a bumper sticker thing that Theresa May can take back to Parliament. And remember, her opponents in Parliament want the backstop gone. They don't want a nice garnish around it, they want it gone.
And in terms of the bad news for her from this summit, the thing I would certainly pick out, and I think you probably agree, is in the draft that we saw before the whole thing started, there was that line saying that the EU would look at trying to find more reassurance, basically, for Britain on the backstop. And then that was cut out, just taken out of the text, and that must be a huge disappointment for the Prime Minister.
I think we shouldn't over-exaggerate it. I mean, the UK was looking forward to a two-stage process that would start today and would continue with officials working on more language, more reassurances, more interpretations, more documents. There is now not going to be a formal process. Listen carefully though, not going to be a formal process. That means you can have an informal thing that doesn't look like a process. I think if the UK was to come forward in private, even with some really precise things that they want, I don't know, maybe a document that the EU could sign up, some language that the EU could come up with, or something, an idea, a precise idea rather than just a vague guarantee, then I think the EU would be prepared to consider it. And I do wonder, is that what Theresa May was doing when she had a series of very low-key meetings with other leaders like Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron today? This is all designed to be done away from the cameras and not have a formal process.
Yeah, she was making it very clear the talking is not over, the talking was continuing today.
Yeah, I just wonder it won't be done in a high-profile way like this, and then, ta-da, the day before the meaningful vote in Westminster, or the week before when the vote comes in January, will some reassurance be forthcoming? It works for the EU because they don't have to see their concessions or their interpretations ripped apart in the Sunday newspapers or by the backbenchers over the Christmas holidays, and it works for Theresa May in that, think about the sense of drama there will be when Brexit Day is even closer than it is now. A reassurance that might have looked a bit rubbish today may look way more impressive when it's on, say, the 17th of January.
Sort of rabbit out of a hat at the last minute, maybe.
Hey, maybe, yeah.
All right, Adam, thank you very much indeed. Adam Fleming there, our Brussels reporter. Let's go to Westminster, see what they're making of it there. Chris Mason, our political correspondent, can tell us. It was interesting listening to Jean-Claude Juncker, because he was saying he's been watching the debate on Brexit in the House of Commons kind of with horror, horrified at the tone of that debate, and that's what he was talking about when he said that word nebulous. But anyway, what politicians there at Westminster make about what's happening here in Brussels?
I think the interesting thing, Ben, picking up on the conversation you've just been having with Adam there is, and to continue with the sort of animal theme you were talking about, rabbits out of hats, is whether or not we're going to get a mirror image in the next few days, and particularly or potentially in the next few weeks after Christmas, where there is simply a big gap between what is perceived to be something significant in Brussels and in Whitehall and how it goes down here. Now, you'll remember a couple of years ago that whole business, that whole renegotiation that David Cameron went through before the EU referendum, where there was a sense in Brussels and in Whitehall that the Prime Minister then, Mr Cameron, had secured some pretty significant concessions, and yet they were perceived by many here, particularly on the Brexiteer side, as adding up to not very much. In other words, you know, the Prime Minister comes back with an elephant, but it's perceived to be a mouse, that the scale, there's a difference in interpretation of scale of what is achieved. Now, in the short term, the Prime Minister will return to London, will go before MPs on Monday for the usual reporting back of an EU summit, and frankly, she's not going to have a vast amount to be able to say. As Adam was reflecting on there, it's a sort of 40-second explanation at best to try and talk about the kind of garnish that the EU has vaguely talked about in terms of reassurance. There is this hoped-for potential breakthrough following on from these private discussions that happened at the end of the summit that Adam was speculating about there, but that's not going to amount to anything one would assume that the Prime Minister can elaborate on in any detail come Monday. So it could be yet another, and there have been countless ones of these in the last few weeks, afternoon where the Prime Minister stands before MPs and has a rough ride for a very long time, and then I guess she'll hope that things go a little quiet for a couple of weeks over Christmas, and then potentially, via whichever channel she can, they try and find something that she can attach to the conversation before that meaningful vote in the middle of January. But as things stand, it just doesn't seem, Ben, like she can come back with anything that would substantially shift the dial. Because remember, she could persuade dozens and dozens and dozens of Conservative MPs onto her side of the argument from the opposing side of the argument at the moment, and still not have the numbers to get it through.
All right, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Well, the British Prime Minister has now left the summit, heading back to London at the end of a summit which, as we've been hearing from Adam Fleming and others, has given her some things, but other things she might have wanted, she's been disappointed about. Certainly, she's got nothing that you could call a game changer in her attempts to get her Brexit deal through the British Parliament. Now then, let's hear from the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, because he's been also talking here in the last half an hour or so at the end of this EU summit and giving us his take on the whole Irish backstop issue and the withdrawal agreement itself.
The major topic of discussion from our point of view at the summit was Brexit and finalising the withdrawal agreement and getting it over the line, which we're very keen to do. I'm satisfied with the draft conclusions which were agreed last night, and those conclusions say that we as the European Union endorse the withdrawal agreement. We'll proceed with its ratification and it's not open for renegotiation. We also re-emphasised our wish to develop a close relationship with the United Kingdom after it leaves the European Union, and that we want to embark on discussions on the future relationship as soon as the withdrawal agreement is ratified by Westminster. and we re-emphasised that we will make our best endeavours to ensure that it's concluded expeditiously so that it's not necessary to extend the transition phase or invoke the backstop. The European Council also underlined its support for the backstop as an insurance policy to avoid a hard border, and also emphasised that it had to form part of the withdrawal agreement. And I should say, even though this may not be fully appreciated, all of the 27 Prime Ministers and their delegations understand that the backstop relating to Ireland, the protocol in Ireland and Northern Ireland, is not just an Irish issue. It's there for three reasons. It's there, first of all, to ensure that there is no hard border on our island between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, thus securing the peace and the Good Friday Agreement. Secondly, it's there to make sure that the open border doesn't become a backdoor to the single market. It's about the integrity of the single market as well, and making sure that that border, which will remain open, doesn't become the backdoor to the single market of the European Union, because it is, of course, not just a political border between Ireland and the United Kingdom. It's also a border between the European Union and what will become a third country. And it's there for a third reason as well, which is to make sure that no side is able to use the threat of a hard border as leverage in the negotiations on the future relationship, because the backstop, by definition, puts in place a legal assurance that there can never be a hard border on the island of Ireland, no matter what the circumstances. It's an all-weather guarantee.
So that's the Irish Prime Minister, the Irish Taoiseach Leo Varadkar there, speaking the last half an hour ago. As I say, Theresa May now heading away from the summit at the end of it. Saying, you know, when she arrived here yesterday, she said there won't be any immediate breakthrough. She wasn't expecting that. She certainly hasn't got an immediate breakthrough. She might have got some progress here and there. She might be disappointed with some of the text that was released at the end of the EU summit, and perhaps the atmosphere where the EU leaders were really saying that she needed to be clearer in her presentation of exactly what Britain wants in terms of selling this Brexit deal to the House of Commons. She said in response to that she had been crystal clear. So there have been disagreements, but at the end of it all, Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker praising her and saying that she's a good friend of theirs and of the European Union's. Well, that's the latest from Brussels. Back to you, Simon.
Ben, thank you very much. Ben Brown there. You're watching Afternoon Live. These are our headlines this afternoon. Theresa May says the EU is prepared to give further assurances about the Brexit deal, but admits having a robust conversation with the European Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker. Mr. Juncker counters, saying he wasn't referring to Mrs. May in his nebulous comment, but the overall state of the Brexit debate in Britain. President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, says the president knew it was wrong to order the payment of hush money to two women who alleged affairs with him.
And in sport, Chelsea have condemned fans who sang anti-Semitic chants during last night's Europa League game, saying they have shamed the club. It comes after allegations of racist abuse directed at Raheem Sterling at Stamford Bridge last weekend. Ashley Giles is confirmed as England's new director of cricket, replacing Andrew Strauss as the national team gears up for a home World Cup and Ashes series next year. And the battle of the Paralympic superstars. Kadina Cox beats Dame Sarah Storey to win Britain's first ever Track World Cup paracycling gold medal. I'll be back with more on all those stories just after 4:30.
Donald Trump's former lawyer says the president directed him to pay money to two women who alleged having sexual affairs with him. In an exclusive interview with ABC News' George Stephanopoulos, Michael Cohen, who's been sentenced to 3 years in jail, said Mr. Trump acted because he was very concerned the allegations would become public.
He directed me to make the payments. He directed me to become involved in these matters, including the one with McDougal, which was really between him and David Pecker, and then David Pecker's counsel. I just reviewed the documents in order to protect him. I gave loyalty to someone who truthfully does not deserve loyalty.
He was trying to hide what you were doing, correct?
Correct.
And he knew it was wrong?
Of course.
When you think about it, when you look back, did you know what you were doing?
I'm angry at myself because I knew what I was doing was wrong. I stood up before the world yesterday and I accepted the responsibility for my actions. The actions that I gave to a man who, as I also said in my elocution, I was loyal to. I should not be the only one taking responsibility for his actions.
So he's still lying?
Yes.
Well, let's speak to our Washington correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue. Not for the first time I start an interview with you. Couldn't really make this up. And I'm just wondering how worried President Trump must be watching interviews like this.
Well, we don't yet know, is the honest truth, and that is a little surprising because everyone's been sitting around frantically refreshing their feeds of Twitter, etc., waiting for some kind of response from the president to this interview, and so far has been absolutely zilch. But I imagine he's pretty seething in the sense that what Michael Cohen has done here is put the president slap bang in the centre of a great big conspiracy to break election laws, and a conspiracy then makes it more of a crime rather than just a civil offence. Now, bear in mind, I think this is one convicted liar accusing someone else of being a liar, so you have to sort of take that into account. But at this sort of stage, there's a feeling, I think, that perhaps, you know, there's not much in it for him to continue to make stuff up. And the special counsel, Robert Mueller, who's looking into those allegations of Russian collusion, he has said that Cohen has been helpful and credible in the assistance he's been giving to that inquiry.
And making the point that nothing went through the Trump organization without Donald Trump knowing about it.
That's absolutely right. He says that everything was run by him. He would bark out orders and they would get done. And indeed, in one of these deals involving Karen McDougal, now she was the Playboy centerfold model, which was back in 2015. Cohen is effectively saying here that the deal that was done with the publisher of National Enquirer, AMI, to pay money to her in order to sort of keep the story quiet was really organised with Trump in the room with the head of AMI, David Pecker. So he's saying that he didn't even sort of organise that. He was just sort of an onlooker sorting out the documentation. And of course, AMI is now cooperating again with the authorities and has acknowledged that the intention of that payment was to assist the president and to keep the thing quiet and assist him in the whole political process.
Gary, good to talk to you. Thank you very much, Gary O'Donoghue there. Now, French authorities say a person has died following the attack at a Christmas market in Strasbourg on Tuesday. The market reopened today with tight security. Police in the French city are questioning relatives of the attacker, Sharif Shakat, who was killed in a shootout with police last night. A 16-year-old boy who carried out a horrific attack on a Lithuanian schoolgirl before dumping her body on a park bench has been found guilty of rape and murder. The body of 14-year-old Victoria Sokolova was found in a park in Wolverhampton in April. It's believed the boy used a hammer to batter her to death and had originally persuaded her over Facebook to meet him. A 5-week-old baby who was attacked by 2 dogs near Peterborough last month has died. Reuben McNulty was seriously injured after the incident in Yaxley in Cambridgeshire. The family's 2 Staffordshire Bull Terriers have now been destroyed. The award-winning rapper Jay Huss has been jailed for 8 months for carrying a knife outside a shopping centre in East London. The musician appeared at Snaresbrook Crown Court under his real name of Mamadou Diallo. The court heard the 22-year-old had 6 previous convictions for 10 offences going back to 2011. A British yachtswoman whose boat capsized in a storm in the South Pacific has finally arrived in Chile a week after being rescued by a cargo ship. Susie Goodall, who's 29, had been competing in the solo Golden Globe round the world race. She spent 2 days adrift in her damaged boat before she could be picked up by a Chinese cargo ship. These are the first pictures onto dry land. Well, our correspondent Duncan Kennedy has been at her yacht club on the Isle of Wight.
Susie has just reached land in Chile after spending a week on a freighter that brought her back from 2,000 miles out in the Southern Ocean. And the 2 days before that, she was on really a yacht that had been wrecked by a storm, lost the mast, very much nearly in fear of her life in that, managed to get the distress signal out. A passing freighter came and picked her up and brought her back to shore. Now, somebody who knows her very well is Ben Willows here at UKSA. Ben, the fact that she's made land, your reaction to that?
Oh, look, fantastic news for Susie and her family especially, and all her supporters. The experience that she's been through being wrecked on the boat in the middle of the Southern Ocean, one of the most remote places on the planet. Such good fortune that there was a ship that with the ability to get alongside her safely, and in those conditions, a real test of seamanship to get her on board safely and get her back to land. So really pleased.
You've known her, you've trained with her here. Sure. How resilient is Susie to have survived this?
Oh, hugely. I mean, when we first heard the broadcast of her radio call out after it, you just actually, yes, she was shaken, but you could hear that she was calm, she'd thought through it. The level of resilience she's shown, quite remarkable. And she, you know, she trained and worked here with us as an instructor, and always hugely positive, hugely committed, very proactive person.
She's the third sailor who had to be rescued in this race. 5 masts smashed. Any reason to call off these round-the-world races because of all the dangers?
No, I think absolutely opposite. I think they are, you know, they are one of the few things left out there that show a real test of human courage and fortitude and adventure. And all the same, they're well prepared and they know what they're getting themselves into.
Duncan Kennedy reporting there from the Isle of Wight. A rocket plane belonging to the Virgin Galactic Space Programme has successfully blasted to the edge of space, reaching 50 miles above the Earth. These are the pictures. This is an in-flight video of Virgin Galactic's Spaceship 2, VSS Unity is its call sign, soaring to the edge of space, having been released at 50,000 feet from its mothership. Let's have a look at the weather. Now, Stav is here. We've got warnings, and they're serious warnings about the weather for this weekend.
Yeah, it's looking like it's going to be quite a dangerous situation across central northern parts of the country into this weekend for snow, but also freezing rain, giving very severe ice. So I'm just going to start by showing you the setup, as I did earlier as well, if you were watching. The reason this wintry... people at home.
Oh, sorry.
We've had very cold air moving off the near continent in a blocking area of high pressure over Scandinavia, and it's also been a severe wind chill. We've had strong winds too. Now notice the orange colours moving up from the southwest. This is moisture-filled, milder air moving in off the Atlantic in an area of low pressure, and as that, and this is often how we get our snowfall during the winter in the UK, it's this moisture bumping into the cold air which is going to be turning into snow, and of course we'll get the freezing rain and all the ice as well. But notice how tight the isobars are. We're also looking at some severe gales too.
Now, so you're using that term freezing rain.
Yes.
Isn't that hail?
No, it's not. See, many people in this country don't know what freezing rain is. A few people have said, well, it's that pellets of frozen water, but it's actually super cooled rainwater. It starts off in the cloud as snowflakes, moves through a layer of slightly warmer air, because we will be getting this milder air moving in. It melts, but ends up being super cooled, a droplet of liquid, which is just below freezing. So the minute that falls on the ground, whatever it touches, pavements, fences, roads, it instantly turns to ice.
But what about your face? What does that feel like? Does it feel wet, or does it feel like ice?
No, it'll feel very cold, but because your face is warm, it won't freeze on your face. It's falling on cold surfaces and instantly freezing. So like instant ice rink, basically. It'll coat everything, pavements, roads. And in the States, they're used to that. Ice storms in the States. I don't know whether you've seen pictures of pylons completely covered in ice and collapsing from the weight, trees, other power lines and things. It causes a lot of damage. So this is what we've got amber warnings in force for snow, but also ice across central and northern areas through Saturday into Sunday. Now, I've got the warning areas on there just to show where the ice risk extends. This is for snow, but for that freezing rain risk. The North Midlands, much of northern England into central and southern Scotland, and also some heavy snow as well for central portions of Scotland. So there's an amber warning for that. So lots of people are out. Remember, it's one of the busiest weekends, the run up to Christmas. Christmas shoppers heading out on the roads. There's quite a few sporting events going on, people heading out for that as well. And it could be really dangerous, roads, pavements.
We need to keep watching your forecast, because those maps have a tendency to change as you get closer.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think they're quite certain on this, and quite a lot of urgency. People should beware of this ice risk. But it is a short-lived spell, just like to tell you, into next week it turns milder, and in fact the run-up to Christmas, it looks like it could be wet and windy at times, but on the milder side. So this is a short-lived severe cold snap.
Okay.
And it's the first significant one of the season as well, because we haven't had much snow so far, but it has been cold the last few days. It's been another chilly day today, but a lot of sunshine around, a few wintry showers across eastern portions of England, northeast Scotland, and we've had a weather front slowly pushing into Northern Ireland, bringing thicker cloud here. So it's going to be a cold evening to come now. Tonight, under those clear skies, much like last night, it will turn cold. Central eastern areas with a widespread frost, but we've got that weather system starting to push into southern and western areas with outbreaks of rain. You can see the milder air just getting in to the southwest there, but further east, it really will be a cold one. And some of that rain already turning to sleet and snow in the west of the UK. Here's the area of low pressure I showed you earlier again, moving up from the southwest as it continues to push into that cold air, of course. This is where we'll see the disruptive snow and ice with that freezing rain. Strong winds developing too across central southern areas as the day wears on, as we head on in towards Sunday. So with all this going on, there will be disruption likely. You have to stay tuned to the weather forecast. This is the picture for Saturday. Central eastern areas, cold, frosty start. That rain will be piling in with a strengthening wind to southern and western areas. It's going to be very wet through the day for Northern Ireland, for Wales, central and southern England. Here, it will be mainly of rain as the milder air will be getting in there. So we could be looking at standing water, even some minor flooding. It's further north and east we're worried about the snow and the ice. Some snow, wet snow parts East Anglia, East Midlands, Northern England, central southern Scotland, accumulations 2 to 5 centimetres, slowly turning back to rain though across England. But then we have that problem of freezing rain, of course, so ice will continue to be a risk here. And over the hills, 10 to maybe 20 centimetres, so some significant disruption to the higher routes. And with the wind strengthening, we'll see blizzards and also drifting snow. Now, the wind will be a feature across central and southern parts of the country. Notice the squeeze in the isobars there. Could see gales up to 60 miles an hour, maybe more, so that in its own right could be quite disruptive to end the day. And thankfully, as we head on into Sunday, something a bit quiet, that area of low pressure clears to the north. It takes its snow, sleet with it. Still watch out for a legacy of ice across northern areas, as it will be quite cold here. But that mild air will slowly be getting into central and southern parts. Temperatures creeping up close to 10 Celsius. And a brighter day for Sunday with some sunshine, but a few showers across the south and the west. So stay tuned to the forecast. Head on to the BBC Weather website to check out all those latest weather warnings.
Stories set to shape the news agenda. Headlines freshly written. Original perspectives on the day's unfolding narratives. See the bigger picture as it emerges. The Papers, weeknights at 10:40 on the BBC News Channel.
This is BBC News, our latest headlines. Theresa May insists the EU is prepared to give further assurances about the Brexit deal, but admits having a robust conversation with the European Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker. Mr. Juncker denies calling Mrs. May nebulous, saying he was describing the overall state of the Brexit debate in Britain. He says there is no will to reopen negotiations on the withdrawal agreement. President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, says the president knew it was wrong to order the payment of hush money to 2 women who alleged affairs with him. Chelsea Football Club is in trouble again, this time over anti-Semitic songs, just days after 4 fans were suspended for racist chanting. The British yachtswoman Susie Goodall, whose boat capsized in a solo round-the-world race, arrived safely in Chile. Well, let's pick up on one of those headline stories because it's a sport-related story. Catherine Downs, and we're talking about Chelsea and problems once again with a small number of fans. Yeah, twice in the space of a week. You remember there were problems at Stamford Bridge at the weekend, now away in the Europa League as well, and widespread condemnation for what is, the club insists, a minority of their fans. Now the anti-discrimination group FAIR believes that some football fans are using the political atmosphere as a cover for their own racism and prejudice. So they believe it's a wider indication of the political situation in Great Britain. As you say, all of this comes after Chelsea condemned a minority of their fans for anti-Semitic chants during their 2-2 draw with Vidi in Hungary last night. Earlier this week, as you mentioned, 4 were banned from their ground after allegedly racially abusing the Manchester City player Raheem Sterling. Chelsea have come out and said that it's absolutely abhorrent. Behaviour like this brings shame on the club. But it's a lot of reflection really in football about the wider problem, about a lack of inclusion in the sport, discrimination in general in the sport, in the
as Raheem Sterling said, media representation of white players versus black players. And Chris Hughton, who is the manager of Brighton and Hove Albion, he was asked about it in his press conference. He's spoken a lot about prejudice and inclusion and respect in football. This is what he had to say about the issue today.
Any racial events in our game, which we are trying as hard as we can to eradicate, are always going to happen. And you hope that it's something that doesn't escalate. Sometimes when times are harder, then they become more prevalent. But racism holds no place in our game. It holds no place in society. But unfortunately, there are always going to be incidences.
And perhaps Chris Hughton picking up on that sentiment from Fair as well, that it's the political atmosphere, perhaps, a wider reflection on the rise of the right across Europe at the moment that means that some fans feel that they are in a more of a position to express their prejudices.
Let's move on. Let's talk about Jose Mourinho. Big match for Manchester United against Liverpool, and he's been talking about it.
Yeah, it's always a big match, isn't it? Manchester United, Liverpool, those bitter rivals. And stand by for a classic Jose Mourinho obscure analogy. This is all about a lack of investment. He says it's not the only reason for Liverpool's 16-point lead over his Manchester United side in the Premier League. The two sides played Anfield on Sunday. Liverpool spent around £100 million more than United in the summer, but Mourinho has suggested other reasons are preventing his team from competing at the top.
It's not just about spending money and reinforcing the squad. A football team is more than that. A football team is not just about spending the money. Football team is a little bit like a house too. A house is not just about buying new furniture. You have to do work in the house, and when the house is ready, then you buy the furniture, you spend money in the best possible furniture, and then you are ready to live in an amazing house.
Does Jose Mourinho feel at home in what could possibly be an amazing house? Who knows? Take of that what you will. Former England spinner Ashley Giles has been confirmed as England's new managing director of cricket. He starts his role next month. He will be responsible for the strategy, coaching and management of England teams. His appointment comes at a critical time with a home World Cup and home Ashes campaign against Australia next summer. Giles, of course, replaces Andrew Strauss, who stepped down in October due to his wife undergoing treatment for cancer. Kadina Cox, who became the first British Paralympian to win gold medals in 2 sports at one Games in Rio, has won Britain's first track World Cup paracycling title, and she had to beat Britain's most successful female Paralympian, Dame Sarah Storey, to do it.
It was a bit of a surprise. I've only been back like 8 weeks, so to manage to put out a half-decent time, I was quite happy with it. It's quicker than I've been going in training, so I guess performing on a world stage is what I like doing.
And beating a certain Dame over here, that's got to be something to be proud of as well.
I do like to beat Sarah every now and again, but I mean, it's not really her main event, so I guess I'll take this one.
The battle of the Paralympic superstars. That's all the sport from me. Have a very good weekend. Bye-bye.
Now on Afternoon Live, let's go nationwide, see what's happening around the country in our daily visit to the BBC newsrooms around the UK. Now, Peter Cook is in Southampton. There he is to tell us more about county lines. This is how affluent teenagers are being targeted by gangs who come from big cities to sell drugs in the south. Be with him in just a moment. And Mary Rhodes is in Birmingham to talk rubbish. Because bin workers are taking industrial action over Christmas in the latest twist in the dispute. We saw rubbish pile up in Birmingham streets last year. This is all about members of the Unite Union, balloted towards the end of November after it was claimed secret payments were made to workers who didn't support last year's strike action. I've almost given the whole story away there, but I'll leave you something to talk about in just a moment. Right, let's go to Peter. Now, you've been investigating gang crime in England and Wales, and you've been hearing how these gangs are recruiting in school children to run drugs for them.
Yes, indeed, Simon. Gangs are no longer just using teenagers they know from their own ethnic groups or locality. They're now actively recruiting youngsters from established state and public schools outside takeaways and shops. Simply, this is because a pupil in a school uniform who is sent to deliver or sell drugs in a town or city is far less likely to be picked up by the police. Now, I've met one mother whose son was recruited and groomed this way, lured by the promise of clothes and friendship. 2 years ago, her family's life was turned upside down. Her son ran away nearly 200 times in just 9 months and was often found in towns and cities far from home. He's recently survived being stabbed by the gang he was trying to leave, and she now fears what else children like hers could get dragged into. We've hidden her identity to protect her family.
It's not now limited to one section of society, as it may have been before. The fact that my son, from a very good school, with a distinctive school uniform, very well-spoken, respectable kid, he's never going to be stopped by the police. He's a good bet. He's a clean skin. And those who are pulling the strings don't get their hands dirty if he is picked up. You've got a kid who's doing what you want them to do. What is to say that they're not then going to be taken to the next step? And for me, the next step is radicalisation.
Peter, you mentioned this is a growing problem. Just how big is it?
Well, nationally, nearly 90% of police forces say they have seen county line activity, and increasingly this involves the use of weapons, including knives and sometimes guns. The South suffers more than most, given the numbers of counties with close proximity to London, where many of these gangs are based. For example, across Hampshire, Dorset and the Thames Valley, nearly 250 children from the capital have been arrested in the past 18 months for drug offences. And the mother we spoke to says she now fears for her son's future.
Whatever plans, hopes that you had for your son or your child, they just don't exist in that way that they did before this started. So you're now happy if you're just accepting the very bare minimum. And that very bare minimum, at the moment, looks like keeping him alive.
Well, Simon, the police say it doesn't just bring misery for exploited local users, but floods areas with drugs, which in turn leads to violence. Today, in fact, a major drug dealer from London has been sentenced to 6 years after setting up his operation in Southampton. 2 fellow gang members were recently convicted of the attempted murder of a man in the city. And detectives are still investigating the murder of a young boy in Oxford earlier this year, which was linked to county lines.
Peter, it looks a fascinating report, and you'll have plenty more, presumably 6:30 BBC One.
Yes, indeed.
Great. Thank you very much. That's Peter Cook there in Southampton. Now, let's go to Mary. Bin Workers Action, what's this all about? Because this is now hitting Christmas.
It is, yes. It's not ideal timing, is it? It's all about alleged payments to some bin collectors during a long-running dispute last year. You may remember, actually, the rubbish piled up on the streets for about 3 months. Now, the Union Unite says members in Birmingham have been denied a council payment, which they say was given to GMB workers who didn't go on strike last year. GMB say this is inaccurate and misleading. Now, thousands of tonnes of rubbish was piled up in bin bags on the streets of the second city for 3 months last summer as a result of bin collectors going on strike. Now that was called over the council's attempt to modernise the service and save £5 million a year, which threatened more than 100 jobs. Now, according to Unite, the ballot this time around resulted in a 73% turnout. 93% of those who voted agreed to take some form of action. The union says there is still an opportunity to avoid that.
Well, we've taken the decision to give the council the opportunity to consider their position, an opportunity to return to us. We're conscious about the disruption that can be caused to the people of Birmingham, and we've given the council the opportunity to come back and put right what they have put wrong in the first place. If they don't, then this dispute will be escalated very quickly, and the council will then have questions to answer to the people of Birmingham as to why it has escalated.
So, when does it start?
Well, not ideal timing, as I said. Unite said that the work to rule will start on the 29th of December. Now, just to be clear, that escalation could mean a full-on strike, but initially it will involve members working to rule, so only doing their contracted hours and returning to base for breaks. With post-Christmas bulging bin bags, unless it can be resolved, there's likely to be a repeat of scenes similar to last summer, and they included infestation of flies, rats and maggots. Not exactly a recipe for a very happy new year, is it? In the last few minutes, we have just had a statement from the council, though, and they have asked the Unite Union to suspend industrial action while they take this dispute into ACAS, the conciliation service, of course. So we'll have plenty more of this Midlands Day, 6:30.
OK. Mary, thank you very much. Mary Rhodes there at Midlands Day in Birmingham there. And Peter Cook, welcome to the I've forgotten the name of this programme. What's it called? Nationwide. That's welcome to the Nationwide. I tell you, it's been a long week. It's all very well for you lot standing there in studios. When you stand out in the cold, your mind is addled. Take it. Yeah, thanks, Mary. Thank you both. That's Nationwide tonight. And if you would like to see more on any of those stories, you can access them via the BBC iPlayer. And a reminder, we go nationwide every weekday afternoon at 4:30 here on Afternoon Live. Now, the Army has failed to meet its recruitment targets every year since it outsourced the contract to the private company Capita. That's the finding of a report by the watchdog that oversees public spending. The National Audit Office says IT problems left recruits waiting almost 11 months to start basic training, and that nearly half of those applying dropped out during the process. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale says this goes back to a 2012 decision to give the contract to Capita, intending to save money.
So the Army closed down recruiting offices in the High Street. It had a centralised online application process. That system has not been working properly. It's 4 years late, 3 times over budget, and it's been taking the would-be applicants 321 days to get through the application process to get into basic training. Half of the people dropping out. It's called DRS, Defence Recruitment System, better known by some soldiers as doesn't recruit soldiers. The Army and Capita both say that they admit that they underestimated the complexity of the system, but they still insist it is now improving. That said, they don't think they'll be hitting their recruitment targets for new soldiers until 2022, which is when the Capita contract runs out.
Jonathan Beale there. Now let's talk a bit more about Jean-Claude Juncker, but nothing to do with Brexit. I just want to show you some pictures from Brussels taken earlier this morning at the European Parliament, where we see a rather unusual greeting by the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. Here we see Mr. Juncker saying hello to people on his way into the building. When he appears, well, he doesn't appear, he does. He flicks the hair of a female colleague back and forth. The woman in question is Pernille Hollien, who's, get this, she's Deputy Head of Protocol at the European Commission. Let's just have another quick look, in case you can't quite believe what you just saw. Well, just, it'll be seared into your memory anyway. So that's Jean-Claude Juncker and a rather, I don't know what the word you'd use. What would you, intimate? Over-friendly greeting. I'm talking to Theo Leggett. He's here because he's going to be bringing us the business news in just a moment. And no, it was a bit...
Maybe inappropriate, I don't know.
Yeah, it's not something that's happened to our... Well,
it hasn't happened to me in many years.
Theo, that was rather what I was hoping you'd get me out of. Thank you. Headlines in just a moment. First, here on Afternoon Live, let's bring you our headlines this hour. And Theresa May says the EU is prepared to give further assurances about the Brexit deal, but admits having a robust conversation with the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. He counters, saying he wasn't referring to Mrs May in his nebulous comment, but the overall state of the Brexit debate here in Britain. President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, says the president knew it was wrong to order the payment of hush money to 2 women who alleged affairs with him.
Here's your business headlines on Afternoon Live. A new report suggests wages are still worth around 1/3 less than they were a decade ago in some areas. Research from the Trades Union Congress, the TUC, shows the average worker has lost nearly £12,000 in real earnings since 2008. Travellers at some UK airports are being offered little more than $1 for each of their pounds following a month of Brexit uncertainty. Those exchanging pounds at the UK's biggest airport, Heathrow, are finding as little as $1.05 coming back across the counter. And 1 in 7 homes could be paying more than they need to for broadband and could get faster services for the same or less money. That's according to the regulator Ofcom. New research suggests that half of UK homes have not taken up faster services even when they're available.
Let's get a bit more on those stories. First of all, wages, Theo, what's going on?
Well, we heard a couple of days ago, of course, that wages are now rising faster than inflation, at their fastest rate in 10 years. That's great, but the past 10 years have been pretty awful. And according to analysis from the Trades Union Congress, once inflation's been taken into account, British workers have lost nearly £12,000 on average over the past decade. Their pay packets simply haven't kept up with rising prices. And in some regions, which includes more affluent parts of the country, their pay packet's about a third thinner than it should be. OK. Now, as it's Friday, we normally take a look at the markets. This week has been a bit of a roller coaster. Yeah, you might remember some of the developments we've seen this week, Simon. So we had the cancellation of the vote in Parliament on the Brexit deal early in the week. Then later on, we had the calling of the vote of confidence. Theresa May won that vote, then went back to the European Union, as we've been hearing, trying to get an improvement on the deal. And it's fair to say that the markets have been reflecting this uncertainty. So shares dipped at the start of the week, they rallied a bit after the vote of confidence, and now the FTSE 100 is heading into the weekend down on the day, but actually in positive territory for the week. But what affects a lot of people, of course, is the movement of the pound, and that has been wavering. That's been the real significant thing, I think. The pound's lost value against both the dollar and the euro this week, more against the dollar because the euro itself is quite weak. But it really has tracked political developments very, very closely. Obviously, a fall of a couple of cents on the week, which is what we've seen, isn't great if you're heading abroad, if you need to get dollars and so on. But the question now is, with all this uncertainty, how far will it go? And for more on that, I'm joined now by Simon Derrick, who's Chief Strategist at Bank of New York Mellon. Simon, thanks very much for joining us, first of all. With all this uncertainty around, there's no sign of it coming to an end, is there? So where's the pound going to go from here?
Well, that depends exactly on what happens over the next 6 weeks, and quite clearly at the moment there's a wide range of possibilities there. In some ways what you're seeing with the pound is it's kind of a little bit like a rabbit in the headlights. Given there's so many different possibilities, it can't decide which way to go. What you are seeing though is a little bit of a rise in the cost of insuring against volatility. We're kind of the same kind of levels you would have seen going into the referendum in 2016. People definitely have the view that there could be an extreme move in either direction, but the key is either direction. The only good news really this week for the pound was when we saw Theresa May win that confidence vote. That has given us a little bit of stability. We're still sort of in the ranges we've been for the last few weeks, but you can see quite clearly in a thin market, bad news could really hit it quite badly.
Yes, and if we get into, say, the second or third week in January and there's still no sign of a breakthrough, presumably we'll see further falls?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that point people are going to start to think, OK, if we can't get a deal through, then what is the default position here? And the default position is that without any agreement in Parliament, we end up with a no-deal Brexit. So I think that if we get much towards that January 21st date without any sign of any material change, then sterling could start to come under real pressure. Remember, last year's lows for sterling against the dollar, I think, were a little over 120. The historic lows, they are set in 1985. They were below 110. So there's still a little bit of space there.
And looking at the share markets, now often we see the FTSE 100 rallying when the pound falls because a lot of the companies on that listing earn their money abroad and bring it back, report their profits in pounds. But we're not seeing that at the moment. So is that a sign that the uncertainty is rattling the share markets as well?
I think it is. Now remember, there's broader stories out there. It's not just the UK that's got uncertainty. France and China have had particular issues in recent weeks. But yes, I do think when it comes to the UK, it is about the broader Brexit story. And you're right, we aren't getting the same kind of lift for FTSE 100 companies that you would normally expect when we see sterling weaken. And that, I think, is an early warning sign of quite how nervous this market actually is.
And no one knows where it's going to go. Simon Derrick, Chief Market Strategist at Bank of New York Mellon, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Should we just catch up on the markets?
Just quickly, why don't we? I can't see them there, though.
Well, there you go.
Oh, there they are. OK, so the FTSE 100, as I said, it's up on the week, but is down 0.5% on the day. The Dow also down, quite sharply, actually, down 1.5%. And the pound against the euro, as you can see, not worth a great deal compared to what we had a few months ago. Particularly against the dollar. I mean, back in May, a pound was worth about $1.40.
Was it?
It was.
Oh, it seems so long ago, doesn't it? Right.
A lot's happened since then.
Yes, Theo. Thank you very much. Theo Legge. Thank you. You're watching Afternoon Live. Now, a statue of Emmeline Pankhurst has been unveiled in St Peter's Square in Manchester to mark 100 years since the day women voted for the first time in a general election. Thousands marched from the Pankhurst Centre, the birthplace of the suffragette movement, to St Peter's Square beforehand. A young girl from a local school made the case for the statue to the council.
As a young person, this statue means a lot to me and my generation. It's a symbol of a woman who did good for the women of Manchester, it's a symbol of equality, and it's a symbol of Manchester being a modern and forward-looking city. I look forward to the future.